we first started learning that there was a problem at home between the employee and her spouse when we started to see a higher degree of absenteeism and chronic lateness. We also started to get reports from employees who worked close to her that she was getting repeated phone calls, and that when she wasn't available, they would continue to try to call people in the near vicinity. He would continue to try to call to reach her, and it seemed like to them that he was trying to keep tabs on her, that he was trying to control her, and she was not forthcoming about what was going on. She just said, would try to blow it off and would say, he was just, trying to get a hold of her and had something urgent to talk about or whatever. We realized this was getting to be was beginning to affect the workplace. People were getting irritated. People were, wondering what was going on, and then we started to think about what else there could be. Then it started to sound a little bit more controlling and more of a abusive kind of a situation than we had recognized before. We talked to other people, in the area who work with her, and they confirmed that this was in fact going on. At some point, and again my memory is hazy, but at some point there was escalating abusive and actually violent behavior outside of the workplace, at home. Never physically against her, but against the house, the car, objects, throwing things, slamming doors, breaking things, and she began to get, from what I recall, she began to be very, very nervous, very concerned, very scared. And then there was an incident where he followed her in her car, and she had children in the car, and there was very dangerous, activity in a little, car chase kind of a thing. I believe that that's what precipitated the move for the restraining order. There may have also been some discussion about separating or getting away from the situation, and that's when it seemed like things started to get even more violent, and it might have been the way that he snapped, or he really started to escalate his behavior. Then we received the temporary restraining order, and she was not in the office at the time. Then we had the staff meeting where we were talking about, escape routes, what to do if he came to the door, what to do if he came to the door with, weapons, what to do, how to get out of there, how to make yourself safe, how to react, how to call the police, who's supposed to do that, should anybody do that, etc., etc. As it turned out, tragically, we never, after that day when we had that meeting, we never had to institute anything, because that night, and I believe it was in the process of her going to the house to get her belongings, get some things, he came in there, and he assaulted her, and it was horrible. I mean, it was just horrible. It was broken bones and massive trauma, many stitches. She was a broken woman. I think it was her nephew actually found her, came running down the street and knew that his uncle was going to go there. Somehow he knew, somehow there was some indication that there was going to be a confrontation. And the next morning I got the call that she had been taken to Queens, the night before, in really, really bad shape, very, very bad shape. And she was, at the time that we were able to see her later in the day, she was not in danger, critical condition, but I think it was later in the day, but she was just, it was horrible. It was horrible. She had broken limbs, she black and blue her entire body, cuts, stitches everywhere. It was nothing that you ever want to see. Certainly nothing you ever want any of your friends, your close good friends, to ever have to suffer. And seeing that and knowing that, makes me even more convinced that, we should have done something. Everybody, there's a complete feeling of guilt amongst all of us that we should have done something to prevent this from happening. How could we have not seen this? And it, was terrible. It was just terrible. And which is why, I constantly look back on this situation, and think about how we could have handled it differently and what we could have been equipped to do to prevent that. Not just the workplace safety thing, but this very real, tragic, harm that was done to one of our very good and close friends. And if it's the employer who can intervene and set up some safety or help her on that way, that's great. If it's her friend, that's great. If it's her church leader or whomever, that's great. But the employer, people spend a lot of time at work. Your employer is a reasonable avenue for getting help. And I would just really encourage that. I was gonna say, I couldn't think of the words, but so that's basically what happened. One of the most important things that companies have to realize is that identifying these problems very early, being able to deal with them, addressing them on a performance-based standard as well as a personal safety and safety in the workplace standard is key to having a healthy work environment for everybody, not just for the individual, but for also all the other people around. I learned from my own experiences, with this incident that came, through our workplace, unfortunately, that it was not a personal issue between the employee and her spouse only. It was an issue that affected many of our employees, not just because they were personally traumatized by the issue or by the incident that occurred, but also because during the course of going through their daily, work that they were supposed to perform, they were in fear of what might happen. They were in fear of the telephone ringing. They were in fear of, whether there was someone coming through the door when the bing bong goes, someone comes in the door, whether that meant that there was going to be some threat that was made to the general workplace. We didn't know that until, very late in the game when people were scared. And if we had perhaps known about the possibility of violence and how it could, violence in this family and how it could spill into the workplace, perhaps we could have avoided some of that effect that it had on the overall workplace, and at the same time really helped out one of our friends and colleagues during a time when she really needed support. It became clear to me that I don't deal with these kinds of issues all the time, but that these issues are very isolating to the person who's going through them. They don't like to talk about it. They like to put up a very courageous, a very happy, a very strong front. And it's very easy to want to just say, well, everything is fine. She's just having one of those days, or, whatever. And if we had perhaps been better trained at putting some of the pieces of the puzzle together, then perhaps we could have identified the issue, and it might have been a relief to her to have an outlet, to know that the people in her workplace care about her, and not only that, that there were services and resources that were available to her that we could have helped her through. And I feel particularly, personally sort of, like I let her down because I'm the one who works with the EAP, an Employee Assistance Program. I have help put the benefits together. I work on a variety of issues, HR related, personnel related as an attorney, and I had no idea how to help her.
What did you see leading up to the incident? What was her workplace and performance like?
I think that there are. It's hard to know how long, when I look back on this incident, it's hard to know how long we might have been able to spot a pattern of behavior. because she definitely had a chronic attendance, late to work issue. And then people would talk to her about it, and it would get better. And then she would be sincerely apologetic. I'm just, I'm you know me. I just have a hard time getting out the door. I couldn't find my blah blah blah. And those kinds of things. And she was very ready to provide excuses that were, I'm flitty, I'm flighty, I'm distracted. And we're certainly willing to accept that, because her personality and the manifestation of herself was in that way. If we had known a little bit more about her family, and if she had been more forthcoming about some of the challenges she might have been undergoing in her family life, maybe we might have seen that the chronic lateness was because she had been up all night fighting, or she had been prevented from getting out the door because her husband wanted to know, where are you going to be, how long are you going to be, where are you going to be this, what are you going to do that, are you going to do this for me, are you going to do that for me, when are you going to call me, being met with this constant barrage of questions, which we later learned tended to be his MO, very controlling. As these things started to get more and more out of hand, when these things started to happen more frequently, they started to spill into the workplace. He would try to call her at her desk. She wouldn't be at her desk. He would then try to call all of her friends who he knows works in the vicinity, and in the vicinity of her desk, and try to find her, wonder why she wasn't answering her phone. And then she'd have these terse conversations with him. I have to get my work done. I can't talk to you now. And then, she would be visibly upset afterwards. But then, of course, she would blow it off and say, he wants me to pick up blah, blah, blah for dinner or something. And, and she would just, get rid of it that way. I heard more about it from people around her when it became they felt that it was now becoming a disciplinary issue. It was so distracting. There were so many kinds of distracting things that were going on in her immediate work area that people started to talk to me, the lawyer. What can we do? How should we deal with this? And at that point, that's when I spoke. We were lucky. We actually had a little bit more insight than a lot of employers were able to have, because we had a family member who was also working with us, her family member. So we used her to probe where perhaps an employer, a more objective supervisor might be very uncomfortable probing. And so we were able to get a little bit more information out of her. And then we learned more about car chases, about lots of very, I won't say physical attacks, but certainly lots of verbal, very, very, very difficult verbal kinds of arguments and things that they would have at night. We learned that from the children through, this other family member. And then I think that it really came to a head, and it really solidified that this is a workplace issue when we received the temporary restraining order against him, and the workplace was covered by it. Then it was very, very clear, absolutely black and white, that we had to, this problem was ours, and we had to not only protect her safety, but also the safety of all the other people who we work with.
When you learned more about car chases and aggressive verbal and kind of stalking by telephone, did anybody approach her directly and prior to the TRO and say to her, we're concerned about your safety? Are you taking steps to protect yourself? Is there anything we can do?
I don't think so. I don't think that anybody actually was courageous enough, I want to say, to confront that issue head on. I know that I personally, if I had been in that situation, I'd be very reluctant to say something other than an open-ended question of, what's going on, and is there something particular that's going on? And I know that some of her friends did ask, is there something that's going on right now which is making this, seems to be a very difficult time? And in the same manner that she had been behaving all of this time, she just, blew it off and blamed it on a triviality. She didn't do something that he wanted, so he was mad at her. But it'll be fine, it'll blow over, those kinds of things. And that tended to be her response to a
So do you have any idea what shifted for her that made her get a TRO? Because if she was blowing it off and saying, that's kind of the way it is, and I'm really responsible because I'm not doing, the right stuff.
I believe that what pushed it over the edge for her were her children, and a fear that they were somehow going to get caught in the crossfire. Particularly, and again, my memory is kind of hazy on this, I think it was the car chases thing where he actually bumped her car. I think she had kids in the car, and I think that's what it was. But I remember I think it had specifically to do with her fear of the children getting involved in some way.
So after she got the TRO and brought it to you folks for your notice, what did the company do?
Well, the first thing, I was the attorney for the company, so it came to me, and actually, I believe that I don't even believe she was in the office at that time. I believe she might have been staying with others, and it came to us through her sister or some other means. But we had a meeting with the entire staff in the office that she occupied, maybe 15, 20 people, and we talked about it. We talked about what our approach, what everyone's approach to do, and the most important thing for them would be to make sure that they were always safe and to think about how they were going to keep themselves safe. We had a front door and a locked back door. And the front door we usually kept unlocked for visitors, or deliveries or whatever. And so we made the decision that we would lock it, and that if someone needed had a delivery or something, they would call. We put an extension on the note on the door and said, "Call this extension, and then we'll receive you." We had a back door, and we said, if there's anything at all, anything that makes you uncomfortable, you just leave and you go out the back door, down the fire escape, you exit the building. And then we had a number of different offices also located down that exit, and we talked about different places that people could go.
So you created a safety plan?
Yes, so we sort of talked. I didn't create it myself. We all talked about it. We thought about what are our alternatives. How can we do this? Who should call 911? Should anybody, is there someone who should be on point to do that? So we talked a little bit about that, and we talked about how people should treat it. Don't panic, be calm, see to your own safety, and we'll see.
And how was everybody going to approach her then, after she returned to work?
Well, we talked about that, and of course, by this time, everybody knew it was not a secret anymore, and everyone, to a person, were very supportive of her, but we're certainly not going to get in her face about it. They didn't want to talk to her about it. They didn't, people are still very uncomfortable with the whole issue, with the whole topic, and also getting in someone's private business. People still believe it's getting in someone's private business, getting in between someone's, marital relationship. Do we really want to step over there? I don't know. People are still very concerned about that, as close as you might be to this person. Even her sister was reluctant to, tell her this guy who you married and who you had children with is bad news, So it was tough. I don't think that it would have been a problem. Unfortunately, she didn't come back, because that night was the night she got assaulted in her house. And so we never had to deal with that. We never actually, after that, had to deal with the fear, because he was
incarcerated.
taken into custody, immediately, and she was in the hospital. So, we didn't really have a long period of time in which we had this concern about what was going to happen.
So she was really right that he was escalating and that he was on the brink of likely doing something very, very dangerous and violent.
Yeah, yes, that is true. I mean, I don't know, it took, again, this was a very long time ago, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and, but it was clear at the time that there had been, that there must have been a breaking point in her life and her family's.
So one of the things we like to remind people is that the victim who lives with the abuser knows him the best,
Mm-hmm.
and to follow her instincts and to collect as much information from her about him to help gain an understanding of what the risks are and what the danger is. And of course that then requires that we have a conversation
Right.
with the person.
Yeah.
Which is what you're saying, everybody, for good reason, would prefer not to have to do. So that's, part of the importance of the community stepping up to help, respond to the problem.
Yeah. I don't know, I know that there was more time and more incidents between the point at which we had the TRO in our hands and when we first got a sense that there was something wrong. And I know that there were fairly specific incidents that caused, this to come to that point. It's been a while, I don't remember what they all are, but there was definitely a pattern of escalation. I don't know what, in retrospect, I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't had the TRO. I don't know how much we would have felt really equipped to deal with it before then. With the time that we had the TRO, I was acting, purely on instinct and as a lawyer, trying to, knowing that, I had some duty of care, for my employees, and that I needed to protect them. I don't know what I would have thought my duty of care as an employer to her individually was outside the workplace if it hadn't risen to that level. I think about that and it sounds very callous and very cold and feel like I didn't care about her, but I really did.
Yeah.
But in terms of what the relationship between the individual and the employer is at that point, before it reaches that level of being inside the workplace and affecting your work, your fellow workers, I'm not sure that I would have, known better. Now, I do. After having gone through it, the first thing I ask as an employer, I have people who I supervise, the first thing I ask when I see a change in their patterns or behavior, is everything okay? What's going on at home? And you find things out. Someone's child is sick, someone's mother is dying, and you can humanize the actions that you take to allow them, as an employer, to allow them the ability to deal with that. You recommend EAP, you talk to them about what their options are. Have you considered, X or Y? Now I have a better sense of how to do that. Back then, I don't think I did. I certainly did not feel equipped to deal with it.
So if you had a few points that you wanted to offer for other employers, companies to think about in relation to the problem of domestic violence in our community or in their workplace, what would those messages be?
I'd remind, the first thing I'd do is to remind people these are your friends. These are your friends and your coworkers. And I'm tearing up right now. Sorry. It's been so long.
No,
Why is it
it's-
gone?
It's from havoc. I don't even have a tissue. I have no tissue.
No, I have tissue. Good. Just trying to blink it all back in.
Mhm.
You know, it was to, okay, to remind people that, you know, you have a duty, regardless of your employee-employer relationship, you have a duty as a person, as a human being, to find out if there's something wrong,
Yeah.
and to react in a human way, whether you are that person's supervisor, or maybe you're a CEO of a company, or you are, you know, the guy who works in the next cubicle who, you know, sorts the mail. You know, you have a duty to find out if everything's okay with them and to act on it, to try to get to know what's going on a little bit more, be their friend and be there to help them. If you're as a supervisor, to, you know, to look at the signs and think about what you do know or you don't know about this person, and try to break past the barriers that can stand in the way of getting to the nub of what perhaps an a performance problem is, like chronic lateness or absenteeism or a lot of sick days or going home early because I have a headache. You know, those can be a lot of excuses for a lot of things, and you can decide to say that person is not a very committed worker, or they're weak. I mean, they're not, you know, they need, I don't know, vitamins or whatever, you know. Or you can try to go a little bit deeper and find out whether there's some deeper problem they've got there. And that shouldn't be out of bounds. And we all worry about liability. I mean, I'm an attorney, and every day I think about, you know, what liability is out there. And I would probably, after having gone through this, I probably would submit that there's more liability in not trying to get to the nub of these problems and help them proactively than have to deal with the resulting trauma that can impact your workplace. I mean, we hear about it all the time, about, you know, sad tales of, you know, people committing acts of violence in a workplace with casual bystanders being the victims. And that is not acceptable. And in so many situations, you know, upon further investigation, you can say there were signs, and why didn't someone do something about it? So take the opportunity to do something about it before it happens. And I think that I'm a better supervisor as a result of having gone through this, but I don't want anybody to have to go through that to learn that lesson. I'd rather that they be able to say, I think I need to probe a little bit deeper to determine whether I can help this person be a better performer, be a better employee, and perhaps address some of their personal problems, one of which could be, you know, domestic abuse or violence even. So I think that's, you know, that's what I would tell employers, is don't be afraid to get in there and talk to them about it, and to you know, seek, you know, to constantly remind yourselves to equip yourself with the tools that you need to be better about it. Talk to, you know, people, professionals in the, you know, in the industry who can provide you with that kind of support. There's all kinds. Don't be afraid to do that.
That's great. Anything else that you can think of that I should?
No, that was great. Can you spell your first and last name and title
Sure.
and company?
My first name is Melinda, Melinda. Last name is Ching, Ching. I'm an attorney. I'm currently an attorney with a nonprofit organization here in Honolulu for 10 years. When I dealt with this issue, I was in-house counsel for a large Honolulu-based private company.
Perfect. I think what I'll do is